Hey everyone, I'm Lauren Culbertson, and I've got with me Matt Sweezey today. Hey Matt, how's it going?
Hey, good.
For those of you who don't know Matt, he is the Director of Market Strategy at Salesforce and the author of The Context Marketing Revolution, which I absolutely love. So Matt, I'm super excited to chat with you today and super glad for you to be here.
Yeah, glad to be here. It's crazy times. Glad to see someone's face.
Crazy times, love the setup that you have going on.
Home office.
Yep, very creative, love it. So let's start off with something that I heard on a podcast that you did a while ago, and I've read you write about it quite a bit since then. But really, it's the importance of marketers staying connected with their customers and the audience they serve.
Yep.
And it's so common for marketers to get disconnected. Like I've written also about starting off in sales and going into marketing. I felt super advantageous because I was talking to customers every day before that, but
Mhm.
within months I found myself getting stale, and it wasn't really a common practice for marketers to be
Mm-mm.
talking to customers so much. And
It's not.
oftentimes we rely on surveys, which are,
Right.
not something that you can get a ton of real-time insights from. So I'm curious, like, why do you think it is that marketers struggle with this so much, and any advice for them on how to overcome it?
Yeah, the easy answer is we're trained that we don't need it, right? We're trained that if you're a great marketer, you are a creatively brilliant human, which means that you can then come up with something that's so brilliant out of your own mind that it convinces somebody else to do something, right? That's the essentially the problem that we have to face. And the reality is that that is a byproduct of a long gone era, right? The Mad Men era, where all marketing was creative genius, where you would just come up with an ad and then push it out in the marketplace. The only time you talk to the customer was to say, what do you think of the ad that I've created for you? Which
Mm-hmm.
both of us would probably agree is a really bad way of doing things. So I think we have to put a couple of things in context. One is we must realize that marketing is not truth, right? What was something that is good, like even basic theory, right? Like right message, right person, right time, or no such thing as bad press or sex sells. These are all theoretical games that are played based on the environments that we operate in at a specific time. One of the things that we have in our modern time that we didn't have in prior times is a massive level of connectivity between humans, right? If you just want to compare 2020 to 2007, there's 30 times more connected devices, 12 times more connected devices connected at 30 times greater speeds, right? So we have a radically different world where now we have the ability to do interactions with people at scale, at massive scale. It's just marketers were never trained that way, right? We believe that a great marketer is a creative genius, not, we don't understand the process of how we actually get to that, which is by iteration, by understanding. And the better that we understand the customer, just like you said, talking with them on a daily practice, we get to a better answer at the end. There's lots of phenomenal examples of this. I love the Trader Joe's example. Let me know if you know this one. The Trader Joe's CEO, and this was years ago in a podcast, and someone says, well, why isn't there a lot of talk about Trader Joe's in the press, right? Why don't you do a lot of PR interviews? He says, why? He says, I'd rather spend my time talking to customers. And so this is what the guy did. He's a CEO. He'd hop on a plane and he'd fly to a different Trader Joe's. I think this was on a weekly basis, right? Like a different Trader Joe's across the country every week. It was some astronomical number, right? He flies, he walks into the store, and he finds a customer, and he says, excuse me, he says, here's who I am. I'm the CEO of this organization. Would you mind if I shop with you? Right? And that's the first question. The person's usually going to like, hell yeah, you can shop with me. This is cool,
Yeah.
right? So then they start walking around the store and he just starts pulling stuff off shelves and said, have you tried this? And the person's like, no. And he goes, well, let's try it. And he just starts opening stuff up. And then they start trying things with the person in real time, getting real time feedback. And
Yeah.
so he saw that as a much better way of driving the business forward. And we obviously know how successful Trader Joe's is, right? Some of the big things that I think people miss is Trader Joe's only has like 1,200 SKUs. The average grocery store has like 6 figures of SKUs, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have a massively slimmed down thing, but they know exactly what to put there because of how tight they are with the customer, right? And so I think that's just a framework that we have to shift of saying the role of marketing isn't about creative genius. It first starts with understanding your customer, and then from that understanding, we then know what to do, and then we need to constantly stay with them to understand how it changes and at the speed that it needs to change.
Yeah, I love that example. It's almost like a modern day focus group that marketers can easily do, especially in B2B SaaS, where it's so easy to just hop on a call and get feedback in real time.
Yeah.
I also really love your point around, you know, how connectivity has really been amplified. And I think, you know, with that, the amount of data that we have to inform our decisions also has been amplified. But we're in this point right now where we're starting to see tools like AI and machine learning that can actually consume all of that data and help guide our direction. How do you see the marketing role evolving with kind of qualitative and using quantitative data around product usage and things that are historically like product or customer experience? Like, how should a marketer be kind of staying involved with how a customer is using their product through all this usage data?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, they need to be understanding that CX and UX is a part of marketing's role.
Yes.
Right? So that's a big problem that we have again, is that, you know, marketing was traditionally a siloed organization at the very front of a customer life cycle, was not involved in the other aspects. If we go through what we talk about is marketing transformation, right? Digital transformation is the organization evolving themselves to a new era. If we don't bring the practice of marketing along that transformation with it, then it's all for naught. And what that also means is the expansion of marketing across the customer journey. So to the point of UX and CX now become elements of marketing just as much as any other customer experience touch point, because they are experiences that the individual has, and the experiences are what marketing is about. Right? It's not about how creative your message is, it's how consistent and amazing are all the experiences, and are they guiding them to the place where the customer wants to go. Right? So to the terms of data, right? Marketers must have real-time data on how people are using their products. If you don't, you're not going to understand how to, one, reduce churn, or two, increase lifetime customer value. Those are two major growth levers that marketing must own. And really the big part is that executives must shift their mindset to realizing that that is a massive growth of an organization. So shifting money from saying, let's just focus on net new organizational stuff, right? I mean, actually, if you're looking right now, I think there's a 25% dip in people's advertising budgets, and they're putting that money back into other experiences further down the funnel. But if they're not data driven, you're not going to know. So I think there's a couple of big problems that marketers have. One is understanding that they need to be focusing on those things. I think marketers know that. Executives haven't really gotten that at a full, like, we haven't seen that really kind of be the new definition of marketing.
Yeah. They're like held back because they're not empowered to own it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, without executive approval, this can't happen.
Right.
And then the second thing that we need to think about is marketers just don't understand how to really use data, right? You talked about quant and qual, right?
Mm-hmm.
So quantitative and qualitative, right? A number versus a conversation. It's pretty much the basics if you're unfamiliar. So people that only look at numbers and don't look at the qual really don't have the full picture. And let me give you a really simple, easy scenario, right? So let's say that we have a download. Let's say that we create something and there's a positive metric. Maybe that's a download, maybe that's a use, maybe that's a view, whatever your metric is. That's only half of the story, right? Because the experience that happened at the beginning of the consumer's experience, that didn't happen at the end of their experience. So all we know is that they went to that experience. We don't know what the experience had as an effect on the individual.
Yeah.
Right. So there's the qual side. We need to follow up with that and say, okay, you know, ask people, have they, you know, what was the experience they thought? So let me run you through some numbers and research that I've done. Ask 400 B2B buyers, have you ever been disappointed? Now, this isn't, you know, product usage, it's just general. Yeah. Have you ever been disappointed with content that you've downloaded from a brand? Well, 71% of B2B buyers say yes. Right. That's not the surprising statistic. The surprising statistic is to what level was that disappointment? And 25% of those people said they would never engage with those brands ever again. But now if we go back to just the pure quant number, which is we saw the positive number we wanted, it was a download, but we didn't follow up with them to see what was that experience actually. Was it the experience you wanted? We actually are driving people away from our brand. And if you run that number, that's 18% of all people that would engage with the experience actually have a negative experience. So let me finish up this story. Here's the question we need to ask. How many of us actually follow up with people and ask, was that an experience that you were looking for, right? Yes. No one does. I've asked this question to thousands and thousands of marketers around the globe. Less than 1% of marketers have ever picked up the telephone to call somebody and ask them what they thought of that experience and how they can make it better for the next person, right? So we need to realize that experiences are what we need to focus on. Their experiences across the customer journey, right? And UX and CX are part of that. but we also can't just rely on numbers. Yes, we need to have data understanding what they're using, how they're using it, breaking it down by personas to create journeys. We also then also must incorporate picking up the telephone. Once again, that's not something we were ever trained to do, right? So that's not a normal part of how we think about marketing.
Yeah, that resonates with me big time. Just, a big part of my day-to-day is helping companies sift through feedback they're getting naturally from multiple channels. And the biggest kind of mental roadblock I have to get around is all that's qualitative data, but how to pair that with the quantitative. And I think the example that you used around a marketer looking at a content download and then really understanding, well, was that the experience that you expected, and was it a positive experience, is kind of a more natural gap for how marketers would think. But you'd be shocked the amount of conversations that start with support and just understanding the support tickets coming in, understanding complaints about satisfaction with how quickly their issue was resolved, the amount of knowledge that the rep had. And at those same companies, the marketer is touting this best class support organization because of their support metrics of average speed of answer and,
Right, it's the wrong ones.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're looking at siloed metrics on a siloed organization rather than an experience metric across, which is once again why marketing cannot be a silo and has to be spread across, right?
Exactly. And
totally different ideas.
Exactly. And understanding too that you don't define what good looks like for that metric, your customer does, and you can use that qualitative to understand that. I think it applies to every stage of the journey, even in content downloads, right?
Yeah, let me share a quantitative number from Bain and Company. So we all know who Bain is, right? Big research firm, consultancy. So Bain did this, and I love this research. So a lot of us understand that, and when I say us, I'm talking about progressive marketers. We understand the need for experiences. We have for a long time. We have a hard time making the case of what is an experience and getting organizations to understand and see this, because it's a monumental shift, right? It is a radical shift, just as radical as digital transformation is for an organization, right? So, organizations believe, they've heard the word experience, but you and I both have seen this. We walk into an organization, they're like, we're experience focused. I took my physical thing and I made it digital. And it's like, that's not an experience. You literally do not understand the definition of experience. Experience is a series of connected events, right? It's all interactions combined. That is the experience. It's not a singular. It is a network of things. And so they must be connected. So here's the research from Bain. They asked organizations, right? Do you create good experiences? 80% of the businesses believe they're creating great experiences. Now, what that Bain then did is took customers from those actual organizations, then asked them the exact same question. Do you believe that this business is creating a good experience? You'd be surprised at the delta between the two. We obviously know that there's going to be a difference. It's a 72% delta. 80% of organizations believe they create a great experience. Only 8% of their customers would say the same thing, right? That is a massive delta because organizations don't understand this definition of experience, right? For the exact reasons that you just stated, they're looking at these as, all right, we're looking at the customer support metric, and yes, we can get that answered in under a minute, right? But what's not happening is there's not an organizational discipline to say, listen, that's a problem. That's a bad experience. Let's fix that experience. If we fix that experience, revenue, lifetime customer value, reduced churn goes up. That's what the goal is, right? The goal is not, can we get support questions to be answered in under 30 seconds? No one cares. If it takes me 5 minutes to get my question answered and it's answered efficiently as possible, accurately and as humanely as possible, that's what I care about, right? So it's not like that's the wrong metric that we look at. But anyways, I'm just going off on a tangent. But
I mean, this is perfect. I haven't asked one of the questions that I planned to because we've just been rolling.
Sure, far away.
No, but I think, that is something I did want to ask you about too, because I have read additional data points that you've put out there and research that you've highlighted about how disconnected companies are from their actual experience. And I see a big problem with organizational silos and who owns it and people wanting to own it when maybe there is no owner. What do you think some of the critical components are to really have an amazing experience at your company? Like, what do companies need to do to do this?
Yeah, so if we break this down, so I'm going to answer this with data, right? So I'm going to answer this
Love
with
it.
about 5 years of research that we've done at Salesforce, looking into what is the difference between a high-performing marketing organization and everyone else, right? And so what we find is, number one, is that for you to create a very positive and amazing experience, right, you first have to have an executive approval into that, as that's what marketing means for the organization. That has to be a foundational shift at the executive level, right? They have to buy into this concept of experience and see experience as a string of connected experiences across the customer journey. It starts there. Without that, there's not going to be the budget to do this. These things do cost money. It's a budget. It's a shift of an organization from budgets from one place to another, right? This is an increased spend, and we're seeing increased budgets anywhere from 3 to, I won't even tell you how far some people spend on this, but it's radically different.
Mm-hmm.
So, massive increase in budget. Two, so that's number one. Two is they put an executive in charge of the experience, right? So we then face the next problem of, okay, we understand we should do these things, but operationally, who's the king of the castle, right? And so
Right.
then we end up starting to have fights between departments.
Yes.
Departments are judged based on departmental metrics. So when you go into the boardroom or the executive meeting, you bring your metrics from your department and you share them, right? Your owner, and back to the service example, are we decreasing service level times? Are we decreasing the number of complaints that come in? That is not an experience metric, right? So the high performers next put a chief experience officer or chief growth officer, I don't care the term that you want to use. They put an executive over all of those departments with the ownership of the experience. Just to the basic concept of business, if we don't measure it, it doesn't get improved. So if there's not an executive who owns it and who can work across all those departments, this cannot happen, because if we go back to the point that you have of there's a battle as to who owns this, who owns that, it needs to have that executive. The third is then it needs to be technologically backed up, right? Creating experiences and connecting these things takes a technological advancement in an organization, because we're dealing with a couple of things that organizations didn't have the capabilities for before. One is getting data and keeping it connected. Right? I call this the identity crisis. So if we just want to think about this from a large scale perspective, just think about this from two basic numbers. The average organization just inside of marketing has 15 different data sources. Inside of marketing as well, they have 12 different tools, right? Now, some organizations have 30 different tools in the organization just in marketing. And if you look at this at an enterprise scale, we see the average enterprise organization having 900 different tools, right? Across an enterprise organization. The problem with these scenarios is that each one of those uses a different unique identifier for each individual. So it becomes very hard to understand who is an individual at any moment, right? This is a technological thing that brands have to overcome, right? They have to solve the identity crisis, and that does two things. One, internally, it means anytime that we create an experience, we all know what the experience we should be creating because we have the full data set of the individual. Then externally, if we are going to then create any type of a marketing program, we need to know who that person is so we can improve targeting, efficiency, and experience of that advertisement or the experience. So that's the third, is that it has. The fourth is that we have to change how we build experiences, right? Most people don't realize that when we talk about a marketing shift, this is not just, new technologies, new channels, this TikTok, screw TikTok. This has nothing to do with that, right? This is about new ways of working, and we must embrace agile methodologies, because what we realize is that the old way that we built marketing was so internal, right? I'm going to create something. I think it's great. I'm going to put it in front of a focus group. They say it's cool. Then I'm going to push it out. I hate focus groups on advertisements because it's not in real life, right? It's silly in most cases. So then you need to operate in an agile format so that you then are testing and constantly iterating and creating better experiences through iteration and testing and data-driven processes, not based on more superfluous and subjective methods of, I think this is good. So those are what I would call the four basic fundamentals of creating better experiences.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And a couple of things I want to dig into there. So one that comes to mind is you mentioned tying together every touch point and every customer interaction across all of these different systems. And then, also even just being more agile as a marketer, adopting this mind shift that's occurred in product management like 10 years ago, right? Of iterating and not just spending months on a campaign to be perfect, like testing. Mm-hmm. What does that mean for the technology and tools that we should be using? And the investment that we should be thinking about? Like you mentioned out of the gate, like it costs money.
Yeah.
Where do you start? Like, what are the hierarchy of needs?
I mean, I can't say where you start
Yeah.
because it's going to be different for every person based on the organization, what they currently have, what they're trying to accomplish, right? But there's a couple of basic things. You need to have a central, I'm just going to call it a repository, right? You're going to have to have a central database. Some terms for that are CRM.
Yeah.
Some organizations, that's an email platform. Like if you're a retail brand, it's probably your email marketing platform. So it just depends. You need to have a central repository. That's number one.
Yep.
Then you need to have things that are connected in an ecosystem. So that once you have tools, then the next is to ensure that those tools are connected at a high level. And so many times brands, it's a tough question, right? Do you stay, do you stay within your stack? So if you should be like, if I'm a Microsoft shop, I'm all Microsoft, nothing else than Microsoft. If I'm a Salesforce shop, it's all Salesforce, nothing else than Salesforce. It's really about the connectivity, right? So that's an important fact of whatever tools you get, make sure they connect and share data as easily and as seamlessly as possible. That's really kind of the basics of where you need to start. So you need to be able to have a central repository, you need to have an execution layer and an automation layer, right? So we can then scale these concepts. How much does this cost? Well, we see marketing costing anywhere between 7 and 12% of annualized budgets or gross product as an average budget, right? That's not the fast growth companies, that's average companies. There's two flip sides. If you're an organization like Coca-Cola, you don't need that much because your problem of marketing is not to convince the world to drink more Coca-Cola. You just have to not screw up the brand you've spent 100 years building, right? Different problem than if you are a brand new startup in a marketplace that didn't exist 2 years ago, and you not only have to build the marketplace, you have to teach people what this thing is and then convince them why to buy your brand. Very different problem. If you're doing that, that's going to cost you somewhere between 13 and 30% of projected revenues, right? Massively different number, average 7 to 12%. And then how we see that broken down, I've actually even got the broken down numbers for you. From a B2B standpoint, we see that broken down. 18% of that budget is going to advertising, 17% of that budget is going to technology, 14% of that budget is going to people, 15% to research, 14% to content, and then 15% to account-based marketing, and then 6% is left over for other. And so that's kind of how we see that broken down in a B2B perspective.
That's super helpful. Super helpful. So, I'll wrap it up with one last question for you. And we've touched on a lot of the components of this, I'm sure. But, I think you've talked a lot about high-performing marketing organizations in your content and how they're the ones that really are thinking about shifting when the market is changing, adopting a mentality of the entire customer experience, preventing churn, not just acquisition, but less than 20% of organizations are actually considered high performers. What is it that sets these organizations apart from the rest? And what do the other 80% need to do to catch up?
Yeah, it's only 15%. So it's 85% of us aren't high performers.
Wow.
So with only 15%, I mean, it goes back to the things that we just talked about, right? It starts with executive buy-in. That means they then change their budget so then the technology can come into place. They have an organizational structure where there's an executive in charge of the experience, and they start to align around those things and find new ways of working. Those are really the big key things that have to happen. And so that's what we have to evolve to. That's a new idea of marketing. So if you can just think about those and start working and doing those, you can then move down those steps to becoming a high performer. But there's another thing that high performers do. They are constantly innovating and they're already ahead, right? So it's like most of us are just going to try to catch up to where they are today. When we catch up to where they are today, they're already going to be in another place, right? And they're going to be testing out new channels, trying out new methods. But the reason they're able to move so fast is because they are operating from an agile perspective in an agile format. And so I think those are the biggest things that people need to realize is that, the future of marketing and what we need to be focused on is not just like, show me new channels. It's totally new ways of working. It's totally new ideas of what marketing means. It's a totally new budget and scope, totally new technological footprint that's required. And so it's a hard question to answer, but really those 4 things should be your guide of where you should go.
Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a really fun time chatting with you. And if you guys want to learn more from Matt, I would recommend checking out his book, The Context Marketing Revolution, or his podcast series, The Electronic Propaganda Society. And as always, if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to me at lauren@loopvoc.com or send us a comment in the link below. So Thanks, Matt. Bye,
You're welcome.
everyone, and we'll see you next time. All right, cool.
Great.
Well, that was fun.
It was easy. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
glad we could
easy,
make it
right?
happen.